Hello, I'm Sayakat Cosplay and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a tutorial video on how to build the armor pieces for the character Setsuna from Yashahime, which is the sequel series to Inuyasha. Alright, let's go ahead and get into how to make these pieces. Hello and welcome to the Setsuna armor building tutorial video, which I already said in the intro, but oh well. If you'd like to follow along with this tutorial, you'll need some 6mm foam and 12mm foam dowels, along with tools like a box cutter, heat gun, glue gun, cutting mat, Dremel, basically tools for cutting, sanding, and heating foam. Other materials you will need are primer like Plastidip or Hexflex, and acrylic paints and brushes. If you would like to skip making patterns yourself, I do have a build guide for this armor available in my web store. The link for that is down below. The build guide has all the PDF patterns for this armor, construction notes, and a blueprint for her polearm. I didn't build that in this tutorial, but I did make a pattern for it. So support your friendly neighborhood content creator and buy a pattern free. To make patterns, like always, if you aren't new here, or if you're new here, I'm using newspaper to make patterns. It just shows up at my house, so I put it to good use. There are generally 4 stages to any prop or armor build: the patterning stage, the cutting and gluing stage, the prep for paint stage, and painting. This video covers all those stages, but you can skip the first stage by getting my build guide. Hint hint. To pattern the chest and loincloth for this armor, I'm using my dress form to create the general shape and size. A quick tip about making patterns is generally you only need to make one side of a pattern if it is a symmetrical pattern. This saves time and saves you from having to try to match the symmetry for both sides. When you copy it onto your foam, you can just flip the pattern over and there you go. Using paper, tape, and markers, I figure out a general shape, size, and proportion. You could make this pattern on yourself with saran wrap and tape. However, the chest isn't super heavily shaped to the body, so using the dress form in this case works well. And then you don't have to try to saran wrap yourself and cut yourself out of saran wrap and go through all that rigmarole. The one thing I know about patterning on my dress form is I am slightly broader across my chest than my dress form is. So if you know of sizing discrepancies beforehand, make sure to account for them in your patterning, which I do. So I make sure to check the pattern against myself before finalizing it and cutting it out. For the shoulder and elbow guards, I'm starting with drawing out a flat pattern, cutting out 2 from paper and taping them together down the center seam, which allows for me to check the sizing on myself and the dress form, because it kind of makes like a little 3D tent shape, which I can check sizing and general shape with. Generally, make sure that the proportions for these pieces work with the proportions of the chest. I did end up changing the shoulder pattern a little tiny bit on the final pattern. Just some changes to the ends to make the shape a little bit different. And the elbow pattern I ended up making twice. The first time it just wasn't quite right, and so I remade it, and the second pattern came out a lot better. The patterning for this armor took about an hour total for all the pieces that I'm making for this video. That doesn't seem like a long time, and it isn't in the grand scheme of pattern making. However, this isn't my first time at the patterning rodeo. This is what I do for a living. So I am used to making patterns. I make them all the time. If you are trying to pattern this armor for yourself and it doesn't look right the first time or it takes you a really long time, don't get down on yourself. I remake and redo patterns all the time. It's par for the course when making things from scratch. Before cutting up the patterns, I make sure to mark all the alignment marks for the pieces. I've gotten better about this for the sake of YouTube. Look at me go! On to the next stage. Cutting out all the foam and gluing it together. You're going to trace all of your pieces onto the foam. In this case, I'm using the 6mm foam from TNT Cosplay Supply. If you need to get some for yourself, the link is in the description box down below. I also have links for all the tools and supplies I use in this video in the description box down below, so you can go and check those out if you want to get some of this material for yourself. Make sure to transfer over all of your registration and alignment marks and transfer them inside the cutting line, otherwise you lose them. I've done that. Don't be like me. Tip when cutting out foam, make sure to cut your foam pieces inside the tracing lines. You are tracing outside the pattern lines, thus if you cut outside the lines, you'll add a bit of bulk. It doesn't seem like a lot, but sometimes a few extra millimeters of foam can alter how a pattern glues together. Sometimes it really messes up stuff, sometimes it doesn't, but cut inside the lines. When cutting foam, make sure your blade is really nice and sharp. Foam dulls blades like no one's business, so make sure to have a good sharpener in your arsenal of tools, or be prepared to change blades often. If you have a dull blade, it can snag and you won't get nice clean cuts. I did end up altering the pattern of the loincloth section slightly once I had transferred it to foam. Sometimes that just happens. I wasn't quite happy with the shape, so I changed it slightly. The changes are present in the digital pattern, so don't worry about that. They are there. When gluing foam together, I usually recommend using contact cement, particularly the Barge brand of contact cement. When using contact cement, you do need to use a fume-rated respirator because the solvents in the contact cement are, to put it mildly, not great for your lungs. But it is the best way for making nice clean seams and armor. You can use hot glue, and I used to use hot glue, and oh boy, is contact cement way better. Hot glue is good for gluing on details and trim, but on major joints that may end up taking a lot of torsion or load, contact cement really performs much better than hot glue or other types of glue. The assembly of this armor is pretty straightforward. Glue both sides of the shoulder together, both sides of the elbows, and the four sections of the chest together along the seams. The loincloth and circle sections are real nice because it's just a flat single piece and doesn't require me to do anything else to it except add trim. Ooh, nice. You will need to heat form the chest, shoulder, and elbow guard to get them to come into the proper shape. I do have a tutorial video on how to set bends in foam. I'll link that down below. It is also a good idea to heat treat all the surfaces of your foam that will eventually be painted. The heat closes the foam cells on the surface, and it is good prep before priming. Once everyone is nice and glued and shape, I'm going to add trim. This is a really nice and easy step because foam dowels are now a thing and we don't have to make our own trim. Back in my day, we had to make our own trims from scratch, uphill both ways. Anyways, using the 12mm half round dowels from TNT Cosplay Supply, I think I used 6 or so of the dowels. I only needed 1 pack of dowels for this project, and I didn't use the whole pack. You can use hot glue to glue these down, but I'm using contact cement here. At corners, I cut the dowels at an angle to make a nice mitered corner, and around curved edges, I don't cut the dowels, so I just leave them and move the dowel around the edge, glue it down, do that stuff. The next stage is the prep for paint stage. I lightly sand down any uneven edges on the seams with a Dremel, which I forgot to film. Oops. But this only takes me about 5 minutes to do because the seams are already generally pretty level, both the seams between the pieces and the seams between the trim and the edge. After sanding, I gap fill with Quick Seal, which is a silicone-based caulking. Make sure to level any edges of the caulking before it dries, as it does not sand well. This stuff is non-toxic. You can use foam scraps or your fingers to make this stuff all nice and smooth, and you can use water to thin out the edges or thin it down. It does shrink as it dries, therefore you may need to do more than one layer. You usually need maybe 2 to 3 layers. It does take about an hour to dry, so you can do one coat, go do something else, come back and do a second coat before you get ready for primer. Before painting, you must prime your phone. To not prime is a crime. Please prime your phone. If you don't prime foam, paint soaks in, it will look very dull and be kind of hard to work with. It'll be hard to paint the foam. You'll also end up wasting a lot of paint because you'll have to use a lot more to make up for the paint that's soaked into the foam. So please prime your foam. There's many ways to prime foam, like using brush-on primers like Hex Flex, Flex Bond, Mod Podge. And you could use spray-on primers like Plastidip, Seal Prime. There's spray-on versions of Mod Podge. There's many different types of primers. I actually just made a video reviewing Seal Prime and comparing it to some other primers. So if you'd like to check out, link for that video is also in the description box down below. If I can, on large surfaces, I'll use spray paint as a base paint to give the piece a nice base color before I go in with acrylics. However, this armor is a very particular shade of dark blue and I didn't have that shade of spray paint and so I just went straight for the acrylics. For the purpose of this video, I'm using basic acrylics you can get pretty much anywhere, but you can also airbrush armor with airbrush acrylics if you are feeling fancy and have an airbrush. For the dark blue, I am mixing a light blue, dark green, and black together in about a 1:1 ratio for the blue and the green, and probably a 4:1 blue-green to black ratio, but I'm really just guessing at those ratios. I mixed the paint until I thought it looked right and then went for it, which is what I do pretty much most of the time. If you are painting with acrylics, you'll likely need to do 2 coats of paint at the least. Depending on how pigmented your paints are, you may need to do more coats. The Liquitex Basics paints and Folk Art paints generally are fairly pigmented. If you get the really cheap paints from the craft store, you may need to do more layers of paint. Sometimes I base color first and then do the actual colors on top. Like if the piece is yellow, to make it nice and vibrant, I base with white first and then paint the yellow. But with these particular armor colors, that is not necessary. For the trim, I am mixing that same light blue that I used for the main armor color with white instead of green and black. I did 2 coats of this as well. If you are a bit messy around the edges, don't panic! Detail painting will clean that right up and make it look nice. These pieces are pretty flat looking in the anime trailer and art, so I'm not going to be highlighting them, but I am low lighting them. This not only creates delineation between the trim color and the main body piece color, it cleans up the paint job and just looks nice. In real life, armor gets dirty in the nooks and crannies and it has natural shadows and color variations. Thus, doing detail painting mimics this, and while it can look cartoony, although that may be what you're going for, it looks really excellent in photos and video. Well, we have come to the end of this tutorial. Thank you for sticking with this. I hope your armor comes out looking awesome. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any additional comments or questions about this armor build, please leave a comment down below. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe button to stay tuned for my next video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later.